After the U.S. went to war in 1917, an exceeding amount of women were put to work in replacement of the several men who fought at war. Men left jobs that needed to be filled, causing a change in the way women were socially, politically, and economically viewed. It was then that women all over Britain and America decided to support the troops as best they could. During World War I, large numbers of women were recruited into jobs vacated by men who had gone to fight in the war. The high demand for weapons resulted in the munitions factories becoming the largest single employer of women during 1918. Though there was initial resistance to hiring women for what was seen as men's work, the introduction of conscription in 1916 made the need for women workers urgent.
The settlement house movement was where women would live in settlement houses and undertake reform work in surrounding neighborhoods. And the suffrage movement had undertook campaigns to enfranchise women in individual states. And it had lobbied President Wilson and Congress to pass a women's suffrage constitutional amendment. Also, Americans were encouraged to help support the war effort by purchasing war bonds.
Many women spent their time working in several ways. Such jobs included bank clerks, ticket sellers, elevator operator, chauffeur, locomotive wiper and oiler, block operator, and several employments in machine shops, steel mills, powder and ammunition factories, airplane works, boot blacking, and farming. These jobs were reserved for men, however, these men weren't able to fulfill the position since they left to war, so women became dependent of themselves since they were the ones bringing in money for the family. Before World War I, women typically played the role of the homemaker. Women were judged by their beauty rather than by their ability. Their position and status were directed towards maintaining the annual duties of the family and children. These duties consisted of cleaning, caring for the house, caring for the young, cooking for the family, maintaining a yard, and sewing clothing for all. Women had worked in the textile industries and other industries as far back as 1880. But had been kept out of heavy industries and other positions involving any real responsibility.
Just before the war, women began to break away from the traditional roles they had played. Women workers were primarily young and single or widows, divorcees, poor married women, and/or women whose husbands or older sons had gone to the front. By 1917, ammunition factories, which primarily employed women workers, produced 80% of the weapons and shells needs. As a result, the number of women employed greatly increased in many industries. Before the war, there were over 8 million women in paid occupations in the U.S.
From relatively minor injuries to more serious incidents and even death, munitions workers risked their health and often their lives while carrying out their jobs. Canaries risked their lives working with poisonous substances without adequate protective clothing or the required safety measures. The exact number of fatalities is difficult to know. Many of these cases were kept out of the press due to the impact such news would have had on national morale and the war effort. Isabella Clark remembered that her friend died from the effects of gas poisoning, contracted while they were feeding gas shells. Henry Oxley remembered from his time at Woolwich Arsenal, prevalent in my particular job was filling coming off the machine into one's eye. There was no protection to shield your eyes from the filling coming up.
Although the visible effects usually wore off, some women died from working with TNT if they were exposed to it for a prolonged period. As Ethel Dean, who worked at Woolwich Arsenal, recalled, everything that powder touches goes yellow. They had their own canteen in which everything was yellow that they touched. Everything went yellow. Chairs, tables, everything. There were a number of explosions at munition factories during the First World War. The massive amount of explosive material kept at the factories meant that this was an ever-present danger for those working at them. One of the largest of these disasters occurred at Silvertown in London's East End in January 1917. As many as 73 were killed and 400 were injured.
Women were also seen as vital resources for wartime aids, and various wartime slogans such as, "You should aid our nation in the war," and "Everyone has to be a helper," emphasized patriotism and created the environment for women's active involvement in many industries. In retrospect, the portrayal of World War I era women were not as glamorous as that of Rosie the Riveter in World War II, but their role in the conflict from a propaganda standpoint was every bit as vital to the war effort, as shown in these posters from the U.S. Library of Congress.
As well as handling the hazardous TNT powder, munition workers risked their health in other ways in the busy, dangerous factories. The working conditions varied, but they often featured poor ventilation, exposure to harmful chemicals, and sometimes even asbestos. And the physical labor involved, which included lifting heavy shells and operating machinery, could be backbreaking or extremely risky.
For some, life after the war offered new opportunities. The Sex Disqualification Removal Act of 1919 made it illegal to exclude women from jobs because of their gender. Educated middle-class women found that doors to the professions previously closed to them were suddenly opening. World War I was a huge turning point for women. Of course, we will never forget the fallen soldiers or war veterans, but we will also never forget the huge turning point the war held for women then, now, and future women. The First World War gave women the ability and chance to show men that we are just as equal, able, and willing to do the things that they considered a man's job.